I'm delighted we're all here to celebrate the end of a great conference. And it's my pleasure to present another NATS Lifetime Achievement Award to my friend Joan Boytim. I asked if she'd share her recording of Caro Nome, but she's really stingy about that, so. Maybe not since the 24 Italian songs and arias have we had anthologies that have influenced us the way that Joan's collections have. Rick Walters, Joan's publisher at Hal Leonard, could obviously spot the diamond in the rough. My understanding is that Rick had some clear ideas about how he wanted this series of anthologies to be executed, but never one to compromise on ideals. Joan told him up front that she knew what she was doing and that he should be a good boy and respect his elders. And that's Joan. I don't think she ever took on these projects with the idea of glory, fame, and fortune, but rather because she believed in the mission of the work. And isn't that when we all tend to do our very best? In her private voice studio handbook, she has a section titled Nuts About Nats. Well, Joan, we're nuts about you. But let's take a look at where the journey all began. She was born at a very early age. And already we can see that special twinkle in her eye. She went on to study music and music education and taught very successfully for several years in the public schools. She played the French horn, here as the only female player in this active jazz band. And like some kind of snappy Renaissance woman, she's also an accomplished accompanist. An artist. You may not know that she makes a new work of art for the cover of her Christmas card every year. And performer. Can you name the tune of each of the things she's singing here? I tried to kind of put that into perspective. It's really great. Oh, yes, and she's also a voice teacher. Her students all know her as a dedicated and exacting teacher, a collaborative musical partner, and a champion of our association and profession. I first met Joan at a NATS Allegheny Mountain Chapter meeting in 1992 when I first moved to Pennsylvania. There were a handful of us in the parlor of a member's church, and they were talking about how to revitalize the chapter. They needed leadership and volunteers for chapter officers, and since I was the new kid on the block, I thought, why not? I can be of help with that. I guess the side note here would be a cautionary tale of careful where saying yes can lead you. When I hosted the intern program at Penn State in 1997, I had Joan come and give her presentation on managing and marketing the private voice studio. And if you look closely in these pictures, you can see our NATS friends, Dale Moore, James McKinney, and Jean Westerman Gregg. Joan's presentation later came to be known as this book. Over the years, I've had the chance to keep getting to know Joan. We see each other at our annual chapter events, and when I was on sabbatical, I was able to sit in her living room and observe lessons. She even showed me through her garden, and those of you who know Joan might know that her garden is second only to her teaching. I've gotten her Christmas cards with long letters about all the joys and setbacks of the year, and I also got to know her late husband, Jim. I saw the beautiful devotion, the pride he took in her work, the happiness they shared. This will be the first conference I can remember where Jim isn't a fixture. But even so, when I called Joan about this award, the first thing she said after, "You don't mean it, is this a joke?" was, "I know Jim is looking down and would be so happy about this." Joan is like one of those best friends you invite into your home. Dear Abby, the evening news, the good housekeeping seal of approval. Somehow she always seems close by, literally at our fingertips, with the volumes of music, the advice on a successful private studio, the solfeggio sheets that my students love to hate. Her work has permeated our profession and carries on in a new generation with her independent teacher fellowships. So Joan, from your living room on Glendale Street in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, you've touched us all, sharing a legacy of publications and successful students. And you've reminded us that when we teach our students, we really are changing the world. Please join me in congratulating Joan Boytim on her Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thank you very much. I need help up the stage because I'm 83 at this point, and those steps without a rail are hard. I've invited Rick Walters, my wonderful, wonderful editor, to just say a few words before I give you my formal comments.
She asked me 15 minutes ago. I wish she'd asked me before I had that vodka tonic and glass of wine. Anyway, this is such a great night for Joan, and it's all about her. I'll just say, I've told this story. I hope I don't step on what you're going to say. I met Joan in 1989 at NATS. She gave an impassioned speech about copyright and the importance of not copying music and all that, and I had to meet her, of course. I had gone to Los Angeles with the idea I need to find somebody to make a high school anthology. Because I started life studying coaching and accompanied with Robert Larson and studied literature, and I could do standard literature, opera all day long, but I couldn't do that thing that required life experience in the studio, teaching young singers, knowing what songs worked, what didn't. We started. She sent me the list, and it was a little bit different, Norman, than what you say, but I'll go with that. But she sent me a list, and I said, and I remember a call where I said, Joan, I'm not sure about this, man. I don't even know half of these songs. And then we argued a little bit. We didn't know each other that well then. I think she quotes me, and I really try to deny this. She says I wanted to put the Lord's Prayer in there, but okay. Anyway, that was 25 years ago. 60 books later, we have accomplished a great deal. She has, and we're so glad to be a part of it and have her part of our family. And it's so, I think, inspirational to voice teachers that this teacher from a small town of 20,000 people who works with young singers exclusively could do something like this, could know enough literature, have a huge collection in her basement. Oh my God, it just thousands and thousands of things she's collected. But to share that with you and have it mean something to you, I know it means the world to her. Congratulations.
When I give workshops, I like to talk off the cuff, but this is too important. I have written out my speech. Several teachers asked me in the last couple days before I do my formal speech for you, do you have any professionals that you can remember from your studio? And I just want to name a few. First of all, I talk about Laura Choi Stewart, who won the second place in the 2010 and the 2012 NATS contests with our association. I also have Lawrence Lowe, who is the new director of the newly reformed symphony orchestra in Syracuse. He has his own Northeastern Philharmonic in Scranton and Wilkesboro. He's a former resident conductor of the Pittsburgh Symphony, and he also was a conductor of the Denver Orchestra, and he guests all over the world. He was a former student. And I have a number of people in colleges teaching voice, Gettysburg, Susquehanna, Michigan State, and on Broadway, I had Joe Abraham, who graduated from Penn State, and he was in various shows. He was in Hairspray for 4 years from the beginning, and in The Little Mermaid, etc. And I have several people who have been cruise line soloists. And just 2 weeks ago, I found out a student that I hadn't seen in 20 years is the technical director of Hamilton. President Spivey and all the other NATS officers, members, and guests here this evening. It is with great humility that I thank all my NATS family for this most prestigious award. As a grassroots career teacher by choice, I felt that I had reached the pinnacle when Laura Choi Stewart, my former junior and senior high school student of 5 years, was the NATS winner. I am known as the old lady on Glendale Street who still teaches people to sing. Getting this Lifetime Achievement Award is overwhelming. Gratitude must be given to my deceased parents who had me begin piano lessons at age 4 when I was picking out commercial tunes from the daily soap operas at the time. Then a year of clarinet starting in 1st grade and switching to private kettle drum lessons in grades 3 and 4 because the band needed a player. We moved to Kutztown, Pennsylvania, while in the 5th grade, and I began violin lessons on a violin that my father bought at a sale, plus voice and piano lessons until the band director sent home a brand new French horn in 8th grade for me to learn, which finally became my instrument of choice. I took lessons on all 4 through high school. Thanks must be given to my 4 voice teachers. From grades 5 through high school, I studied with Ernestine Hull Williams, who had studied with Marcella Sembrick at Juilliard. And she gave me a background in conconi, solfege, and Marchese flexibility studies. At IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, I studied for 3 years with Gladys Dunkelberger, who introduced me to the artistry of singers who expressed their texts with emotion, like Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau, who she had just heard on her Fulbright in Vienna. On my Rotary Fellowship in 1955-56, I studied twice a week with Anna Frau Keisler-Bablow at the Städtische Hochschule für Musik in München, Germany. During that year and a later summer of daily lessons in 1958 with her, I studied over 90 German Lieder. At my farewell lunch with her, I asked her whether she felt that someday I could be a successful voice teacher, and she said yes. That was the spark I needed because I never wanted to have a career as a singer. My nature is that of being the motor that keeps things running. I returned to the United States and taught 3 years junior high school and 6 years senior choral, in addition to having 8 private students after school and voice classes for students who had study halls. This was excellent training for understanding the adolescent voice as my voice teaching skills improved. While continuing to play in the Harrisburg Symphony, I played second horn when Elizabeth Mannion was the alto soloist for the Verdi Requiem. I felt her amazing vocal technique was exactly what I was searching for. Shortly thereafter, my husband luckily chose Indiana University at Bloomington out of 32 schools for his doctorate. I joined him for 3 of the summers as a special student taking only doctorate-level courses that specifically applied to private voice teaching. I was thrilled when in summers 1970 and 71, Mrs. Mannion was on the faculty. I was able to convince her to add me as an overload because I could accompany myself when I auditioned for her. A little sideline, after that first summer, the next summer I walked in the door, she said, "Joan, I need your help." She said, "I need coaching for this opera I'm doing in Chicago." She said, "I'll pay you." I said, "I won't do it for money. I want lifetime in lessons." And some days I had 3 lessons. My technique was transformed, and I began to perform as a major soloist at age 38, including 15 regular and lecture recitals through the next 20 years. Now, in honesty, I firmly believe that I received more than a doctorate in PVT, which is private voice teaching, from all the opportunities and affiliations these last 50 years with my NATS family and with participation in the conventions and workshops. Summer after our marriage, my husband got an NSF grant to study at Western Michigan. I was able to join him, and I took 3 graduate-level classes. This was my very first experience with a real music library. I was so excited to find that there was a NATS organization, an organization for voice teachers, and I read the bulletins that they had in the library. I immediately applied for a membership, although I was so afraid I was not qualified. I learned later that both of my earliest teachers were members. 2 years later, in 1964, I became a member. I attended my first convention in 1966 in Washington, D.C., with Bill Vennard as president. This is my 30th conference, and my husband was with me for 28 of them. Through the years, I learned so very much and interacted with many talented members. Later on, it was my privilege to present sessions on studio management and vocal repertoire at a number of the conferences. Several interesting things worth noting. At Dallas, the 1970 Singer of the Year Award was presented to William Parker. It happens that when I was student teaching in Butler, Pennsylvania, he was in one of my junior high school classes. After the concert, when I approached him, he was so surprised to see me and knew me only by my unmarried name, Miss Frey. In 1980, I created and presented the bibliography Solo Vocal Repertoire for Young Singers with 1,100 entries at the Denver Convention. At the Los Angeles Convention in 1989, I met Richard Walters when I lamented during a panel discussion that as voice teachers, we had not ever had to pay for our instrument, and should we not respect our composers and publishers and pay for the music they provide us rather than illegally photocopying it, which I rarely did. And this was the start of a 27-year publishing collaboration with my wonderful editor, Rick Walters. One of my favorite convention presentations was in Tampa in 1993, when Claude Gossett asked me to take a student from a youth chorus with no previous lessons and teach this student for 3 consecutive hour morning sessions. This required me to condense my typical teaching of about 2 months, culminating in the learning of a complete song in 3-hour sessions. In Seattle, In 1995, on a boat ride to Tillicum Island for a convention outing, Julie Fortney asked if I would be willing to write a column for Internose called A Private View. She stressed that what they wanted me to do was to write exactly what I do and not what others say they do. This ran for 15 columns when in 2000 the board at the Philadelphia conference decided to keep only organizational business as content matter. I still had at least 6 or more columns planned. Since Rick Walters had heard my studio repertoire lectures and made overtures and other lectures, he finally had repeatedly made overtures about a possible book sometime. He felt this was the time and finally convinced me. This was when the Private Voice Studio Handbook was born. Years ago, the 3-week-long summer workshops offered in different areas of the country drew between 30 and 50 participants. This is where so much learning took place. One grew close to one another. There was ample opportunity to sing several times in the master classes, and Ed Baird and Louise Lurch's new music sessions offered much opportunity to sight read and prepare new songs in a day or two to present to one another. Time will not allow me to tell you about how much we learned and the many interesting things we experienced, but I will cite 3. In 1968 at Murray State, Kentucky, Carol Notestein from Ohio, who I had previously met at another workshop, brought a manuscript copy of Song of Devotion by her friend, the composer John Nesbeck. We gave the premiere performance at the workshop. At the Salem Academy in 1972, we were housed on the 2nd floor of a dorm with no air conditioning. We had a horrible heat wave, and it was unbearable to sleep. Adjacent was a classroom building which was air-conditioned, so some of us were seen carrying pillows nightly to sleep on the floor. And Jim and I chose the mathematics classroom since he was still teaching math at that time. Nevertheless, it was a wonderful workshop as we learned a great deal about Purcell, Moravian music, octavos suitable for solo use, and many other things in air conditioning by day. In 1988, in Gatlinburg, we worked with Paul Sperry on American art song. We also had a great session on right brain, left brain. The most exciting thing was a 2-hour after session, 10 p.m. to midnight, on color sensitivity dyslexia. The clinician who volunteered, because several of us were so interested that most of us were newly aware of this topic syndrome. I have had a number of students that I have encouraged the parents to have tested, and some have used color-tinted glasses even through college and in adult life with reading music and reading in general. I discuss this further in my studio book. In developing the first book of solos, I had no idea that there would ever be more anthologies to follow. The immediate success led to idea after idea into a final culmination of 60 anthologies of repertoire for young singers and adult singers of all ages. I took this challenge because I was so frustrated in finding teaching literature for my teenage students, since many sheets were going out of print and many books had only several songs that suited. I was a hoarder of music and continued to add to my library, which gave me the nucleus for of my resources. When I traveled with Jim to his psychology conventions, I would spend the first several days in music stores, often in dusty and dirty basements, and send cartons of cheap music, out of print, or unknown gems to my home. The last day I would shop for me. At Bloomington, one summer, unable to find a pre-session course that appealed to me, I had the famous Curry's music store set me up with a stool and my notebook at the end of the counter while they kept bringing me files of music from the stacks so I could learn to know the bulk of available repertoire appropriate to my kind of students. If you use these books in your studio, you can thank Richard Walters for believing in me and guiding me even though he first thought the books would fail because he was unaware of many of my chosen songs. I must admit, I did these songs to make my teaching much more fulfilling and easier. I encourage you to look at some of the specialty books with which you are not familiar. You may find some gems for special students. As most of you know, these books reached sales of over 1 million copies at the beginning of 2015. Thank you. Interestingly, several years ago, I had a naive junior high boy who came all excited to his lesson one day. I had given him several new books the week before. And he held up one of his new books and he seriously said, "Mrs. Boytim, did you know that your name is on the cover of this book?" In closing, in Boston 2 years ago, Jim and I were early at the reception for Norman Spivey, and we were alone at the table. Jim was aware that this was his last convention due to terminal cancer, and he took my hand and he said, "I am really going to miss these people. I want everyone to know that this award belongs also to my late husband because he was my inspiration and guided me through the many major decisions in my life. For 53 years, he gave me complete freedom to pursue my dreams to make community voice teaching a profession of excellence. I have adopted this quotation as a motto for the rest of my life. Aspire to inspire until you expire." Thank you so very, very much. I am so happy I could make voice teaching much easier for all of you teachers.